Hi there. This is going to be somewhat of an impromptu video. It's not going to be scripted like most of my videos are, mainly because I just kind of wanted to do something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that's going through all of the survivors that are currently in the game and actually look into their backstories and see which ones might actually survive if they were in a horror movie, or at least which ones would be more likely to survive based off of their skill set than others. So for each of these characters, I'm basically just going off of their backstories and what information we actually have on them so far. So I'm going to keep the opening pretty short and sweet, and we're going to jump immediately into our first survivor, which is Ace. So Ace has shown that while he may be able to take a hit or two, and he has been somewhat clever, he usually tends to get himself into pretty bad situations. True, it is shown that he was able to go up against a trained MMA fighter, but any resistance he provided ended up being mostly meaningless, as he just kind of took the fighter's beating. So he's shown to have poor judgment, not really be all that capable physically, and he has kind of that smarmy, smug kind of attitude, which would probably get him on the killer's radar pretty quickly, that hey, this guy kind of deserves it, kind of has it coming. So that, along with just the fact that he doesn't really have any real life skills that we have seen that would help him in a survival situation if he was being, actually hunted. If this were the real world, and if there were no meddling by the entity, he'd probably be one of the first to go. Coming in right behind Ace is Dwight. Now, Dwight has shown to be timid, shy, he tends to make poor decisions in real life, and he has absolutely no survival training at all. Now, he is shown to be somewhat vindictive, or not necessarily vindictive, but have somewhat of a hero complex, wanting to be able to, be out there and help others when they're in trouble. But outside of the entity's realm, it looks like just about every time that's happened, he's actually caused more trouble for people around him. That might end up being somewhat to his advantage, as the killer may underestimate him, but probably not by much. The third survivor on this list is actually the new survivor, Michaela Reid. Now, in the entity's realm, her powers actually make her a valuable asset, because the energy that she pulls from the entity actually allows her to cast spells of sorts in the form of the boon totems. But that doesn't really equate to the real world, as while she is very good at, making concoctions and stuff like that, they don't really help in a in a situation where you're being hunted by a serial killer or monster. Because of that, and her essentially being a barista as her main form of job, she doesn't really do a whole lot, or she hasn't shown that she can do a whole lot to actually defend herself, except for the one time that she was attacked, or possibly was attacked by the entity, but she had help. And actually, if she didn't have help, she probably would have been taken much earlier than she actually was. The next one on the list is Jane. And Jane's life as an actress turned media star is one of beating the odds and overcoming adversity, but her lifestyle, while it certainly has its own struggles that needed to be overcome, isn't quite geared towards surviving an attack. Granted, I'm certain that as a celebrity of sorts, she had to deal with stalkers, and she might be a little bit more on her guard because of that. She is pretty low on the list of having any sort of survival training or physical prowess in general, though she was a stage actress at one point, and you do have to generally be pretty physically fit in order to do that. I mean, granted, it depends on the role you're taking, but it does take some stamina to be an actress, I'm not gonna lie. The next one on the list is Adam, and Adam kind of falls into the same traps that the previous characters have. He's not particularly athletic as far as we know. Most of his trials in real life have been more mental and psychological than physical. So while I think he might be able to possibly outsmart certain killers, once it comes down to him versus the killer or the monster, his ability to survive at that point kind of goes downhill. It's also shown that he is willing to, sacrifice himself for the good of others based off of his backstory, which, while certainly noble, doesn't really equate to being a good survivor. And more than likely, if he was in a horror movie, he'd probably give up his life for someone else. Sneaking around the corner there is Claudette, and she gets her spot a little bit higher than some of the others because of her knowledge in first aid. While I do think that if she were to go toe-to-toe with whatever is hunting her, she would probably buckle and not survive the encounter if she were to fight back. But if she were to outrun or hide or get away from the killer that is pursuing her, she would be able to, take care of herself, even if she was wounded, unless, of course, it was a fatal wound. The gamer girl Fung Min is next on the list. And while Fung has been shown to have a lot of stamina, be pretty bright, her weakness is often getting herself into bad situations. It was shown that after she started slipping as a professional gamer, she started going out to bars and getting blackout drunk. And that is like horror movie kryptonite if you're trying to survive. And would definitely be something that a demented murderer or creature that's stalking her in the night would be able to take advantage of pretty easily. Next up, we have the rugged rocker, Jeffrey Johansen. And Jeff ends up in this medium area because he has kind of been around seedier underbellies. He's dealt with, shady individuals, and he's worked as a bouncer and as security, so he has at least some physical attributes that would help keep him alive. Decrease his likelihood of surviving is the fact that, after all those instances, he kind of just wanted to, settle down, get a 9-to-5 job, have a dog, and just leave a lot of that behind him, which is a decent way to live. But more than likely, some of that hard edge that he had before kind of got rubbed off a little bit. The entity, Nia, is the next up on the list. And Nia has been shown to be able to take care of herself and to get around people that are trying to follow her. Yes, I do get the joke that, Nia is the entity, but we're going to go based off of the actual lore in the game in this instance and not the joke canon that everybody's made. In this instance, Nia can sneak around. She's good at keeping to the shadows if she knows that she is being followed. That and the fact that she is, pretty athletic would actually help her in a horrible situation where someone's actually trying to kill her. The downside to this is that she has never actually had to deal with that type of situation, which is also something that a lot of the characters that are going up have had to deal with as well. Keeping her wits about her, next is Zarina Cassier. In the field, photographer/reporter often has to put herself in some not necessarily incredibly dangerous situations, but in situations where she has to rely on her wits to keep her going. But beyond that, we don't really get a whole lot of insight on what she's capable of, so it's hard to rank her any higher than here. The first one of the licensed survivors comes in the form of Quentin. Now, the reason why Quentin is so low is the fact that he, for the most part, actually would have died in the movie that he was in, were it not for the fact that Nancy was able to distract Freddy long enough to, give him a chance to recover. If it weren't for that, he would have been dead. On the flip side, though, he was able to come up with a plan to try and survive Freddy as long as possible, and the fact that he actually has dealt with a situation where, a killer is trying to kill you gives him a bit more experience in this type of thing. The next one up is Laurie Strode, and the reason she's relatively low here is because based off of, all the cosmetics and what we know of this particular Laurie, this is Halloween 1 Laurie. It's maybe Halloween 2. And while she did manage to survive and, escape and fight back against Michael, she was just kind of an average teenager. Yes, she survived, but she would have been killed in the original Halloween were it not for the help of Dr. Loomis. So while she is certainly a horror movie icon, and Jamie Lee Curtis played the character beautifully, she can't really go any higher since this version of Laurie survived more due to circumstance rather than her own wits and abilities. Next character up is James Sunderland from Silent Hill 2. Now, James, if this were a situation where you are in a horrifying town, there are creatures all over, but you're there trying to get something done, he's probably fine. But if we take the way that James is throughout the majority of Silent Hill 2 and put it into a situation where just he has to survive some maniac that's trying to kill him, his survival odds kind of go down. The reason is because throughout the entirety of Silent Hill 2, James is pretty damn depressed, and the idea of him taking his own life or not putting up much of a fight because he doesn't see his life as being worth much definitely knocks him down quite a few rungs on the ladder. With it being said, he has the capability of surviving for the most part if he puts his mind to it. After James, we have Kate Stinson, and honestly, the reason why she's so high up here is because of the fact that she had to deal with the entity previously and managed to escape. That gives her a fair amount of credit when it comes to would she be able to survive a sticky situation. If it weren't for that part of her backstory, she would be much lower on this list, but that one instance helps elevate her quite a bit. Felix is the next one being put up, and the reason he's this high is mainly due to his actual previous interactions with the cult that may or may not have caused the death of his parents. True, pretty much after that instance, he kind of just tried to live a relatively normal life, but he did have to try and escape from those cultists at some point. Along with this and the fact that he's pretty physically fit means that as long as he's not taken by surprise, he can probably deal with most horror movie monsters or killers, at least compared to a lot of the other characters here. Everyone's favorite scrapper, David King, crawls into our next spot, and David is quite a powerhouse. He is physically fit, he knows how to fight, he can take a bunch of hits. He is a bruiser, and in a fair fight against the killer, he most likely would win in a lot of situations. The downside for David is that he oftentimes puts him in situations where he can be beaten pretty badly. So his ego may get the better of him, and oftentimes characters that have big egos end up reaping unfortunate rewards due to their inflated self-worth. The fabulous Yoon Jin Lee takes our next spot. And the reason Yoon Jin is so high is because she is the only person that we have seen so far that has been able to successfully identify who a killer may be if there was some sort of measure of whodunit in the mix. She's also been shown to be fairly resourceful and has an extreme desire to survive. If she were put in a situation where she would have to risk her life, or more than likely give her life for someone else, she probably wouldn't. She would probably save herself. That doesn't mean that she wouldn't help someone if they needed to. If it's her life or theirs, she would probably let it be theirs. Her downside, of course, being the exact same thing. Since once it's been shown that, she is self-interested and not likely to help others if it's putting her life at risk, it's less likely for others to try and help her as well. Jake Park is doing what he can to survive in our next spot, and he is known to be a survivalist, but from what we have seen so far, he is not necessarily the greatest survivalist. Now, that doesn't mean that Jake is necessarily a bad survivor, but the only times that we've seen him actually try to survive on his own, he got into a bit of trouble. Now, he did probably get better after a period of time, which is why he's been, bumped up a bit, but since what we have seen that he's tried to do in order to survive hasn't been against something that is actively just trying to kill him, it does make him less likely to survive than some of the other characters going forward. Next character we have up is David Tapp, and this David has had a fair amount of experience when it comes to killers and the police force, and probably knows what to look out for in a lot of situations. His downsides are, however, that he is a bit older, so he's not going to be as physically strong as some of the younger characters. He may also try and get focused on actually defeating or killing what is hunting him, and that is usually when he seems to make slip-ups. Both times that he's been shown to try and go after his assailants, it didn't really end well for him either time. Sprinting into the next spot is Meg. And Meg has been shown to be very physically capable, knows kind of how to deal with antagonists around here, and has quite a lot of spunk and a willingness to tough it out when things seem like they may be lost. On the flip side, her competitive nature may get the better of her, and sometimes she can be oblivious to plots that are currently going on around her. If she ends up in a situation, though, where she has to run for her life, I doubt very many people are going to be able to catch her. Next character up is Lisa Garland. Lisa is somewhat hard to place due to her nature in Silent Hill. But let's go under the impression that this character is the true blue Lisa Garland. While she may or may not have been alive during the incident in the game, the otherworld version of her most definitely was. And it is mentioned that she wandered the halls of the hospital dodging the other monsters that infested it all on her own, and this was without a weapon. While it's unknown whether or not they would have actually attacked her, I'm going to go under the impression that they would have, since she was pretty fearful of them. She may not be the hero to save the day, but she will do what she can to keep herself alive, making use of any hiding spaces that she can. And sometimes, that's all you really need to survive the night. True, she didn't actually survive the events of Silent Hill, but considering how things turned out, I'm not gonna hold that against her too much. Coming up next is the racer Yui Kimura. Yui has been shown to be resourceful, does what she needs to keep herself going, and has actually fought off someone who has tried to take her life already. That previous knowledge will go a long way when having to deal with that type of situation again. As while not all killers are created equal, having knowledge of what it's like to actually have to fight for your life will put you in a good standing if you have to do it again. Next character up is John, Stranger Things. Of the three characters in Stranger Things, John fights the monsters the least of the three. That's not saying that he doesn't fight the creatures, he most certainly does, but he has had to prove himself less than either Steve or Nancy. However, he relatively managed to keep his cool in those situations that he was in, and he and his friends survived because of it. And next character up is Ellie. Ellie has actually lived a life of danger. After her and Felix's parents disappeared, she is one of the only characters that actively went in to try and find out what happened. It's mentioned in her backstory that she has gone against the strange cult that is trying to look for these different artifacts that she's finding, so she has previous knowledge of how to deal with people in these situations. Ellie's downside is that trying to keep herself safe often takes a backseat to her trying to find the next clue, find the next objective, which can often get you killed in a horror movie. Next character up is Steve. Now the reason I put Steve over John is because Steve has had to deal with a lot more stuff than John has. While he's been pretty bad at actually winning a 1v1 fight versus an actual human being, Steve has had to deal with the Demogorgon and the Demo Dogs, and managed to hold his own both times. His ability to also recognize danger and quickly acclimate to a situation that he had no idea was even possible also helps rank him up a bit more than John when it comes to trying to survive these types of situations. Finally, we get to our third character from Stranger Things in Nancy. The reason that Nancy is a bit higher than Steve or John is because of her gung-ho attitude, and when it comes down to the fighting, she can actually shoot things. True, she's not as physically fit as John or Steve, but she managed to get away from the Demogorgon mostly on her own, and her ability to actually use firearms when the fighting comes will be a huge benefit when it comes to her own survival. Next character up is Sybil Bennett. For not being the main character in a Silent Hill game, Sybil managed to do quite a bit on her own. It's verified that she was not only aware of the monsters within the town, but managed to fight them off. True, she does end up getting possessed at one point, but it is worth noting that she was blindsided by the attack. The fact that she is a trained police officer and managed to hold her own within that town for such a long period of time does do her a lot of credit, and probably means that when it comes to going toe-to-toe with a mysterious killer, she has a higher chance of coming out on top. Next character up is Claire Redfield. Now, for any of the characters that are going to be going forward from here, I have to state that they are the version of the characters that are from the game that they were directly pulled of. So I'm not going to count later versions of Claire or Leon, and instead focus solely on the version of the characters that we were introduced to. So of the Resident Evil cast, Claire is the youngest and the least experienced when it comes to essentially fighting anything. She has had some minor training from her brother Chris, but mostly she goes on instinct. With that being said, that instinct carried her quite a ways, and it was very rare that she needed assistance from someone else. Because of all of the crap that she had to deal with within Raccoon City, and the fact that she managed to not only survive but get out of the city uninfected, shows that she's a powerhouse to deal with when it comes to surviving on her own. Speaking of Resident Evil 2 characters, the next character up is Leon, and as I mentioned, this is the Resident Evil 2 version of Leon only. Now, this version of Leon is a rookie cop, and that's the key word there, rookie. Of the other Resident Evil characters, Leon hasn't had to deal with as much as Chris or Jill, but his accomplishments are still there. He is a little too quick to trust, and that trust often does bite him in the ass, but his ability to stay calm and his eventual escape from Raccoon City puts him very high up on the list. Bill. Bill was always going to be higher up on the list due to the game he came from, but his placement was going to be hard to put, also due to the dual nature of his character. He is a very capable survivor. What he did in Left 4 Dead shows that. However, he's also been shown to be selfless and willing to give himself up if the need occurs. And that is what drops him down a little bit in the rankings. If he hadn't sacrificed himself in Left 4 Dead 2, well, if he hadn't sacrificed himself, he probably wouldn't be here. But because he was willing to give up his life for everyone else, he would most likely be willing to do that again in another horror situation. It's also worth noting that most of the time he was dealing with the zombified horde, he wasn't alone. He had other people helping him. That's not to lessen all of his accomplishments, but a team surviving together is a little bit less impressive than Bill surviving on his own. Next up is Ash. And the reason that Ash is so high is because out of all of the characters, he has had to deal with supernatural issue after supernatural issue after supernatural issue. Ash has shown that while he is dumb as a bag of hammers, he can survive in the most absurd circumstances. True, there are certain situations where, Ash gets the better of him, but Ash has been through enough to prove his survival capability. Our bronze medalist is Cheryl Mason. What puts Cheryl so high is the fact that she does have some supernatural abilities. They aren't always particularly strong, and she doesn't really know how to use most of them at this point. The fact that she has those abilities at all definitely bumps her up quite a bit. Her story throughout Silent Hill 3 has shown that she is very capable, and while she can be thrown off by tragedy, she's not going to just crumple down and die. If the going gets tough, Cheryl's going to shoot it in the face. Our silver medalist here is going to be Chris Redfield. Now, I knew who was going to be in first and second place here, but I had to choose between the two, and of the two, I'd say Chris has a few major negatives that would prevent him from taking the first place spot over the character that actually got it. See, while Chris has Special Forces training, Air Force training, he can be kind of dumb. He's pretty easily led into traps and can put himself into dangerous situations. He's also not very good at keeping his partners alive, as his track record shows. So while Chris is definitely one of the most physically impressive characters on the list, his major flaws lessens him enough to where he just doesn't get that gold medal. That gold medal instead goes to Jill Valentine. Quick, agile, resourceful, intelligent. While it may be a little bit of favoritism, Jill's impressive record speaks for itself. A trained operative who has survived two zombie and monster infestations. While she is willing to give her life for someone that she truly cares about, she also knows when to let someone go. And she's not going to constantly put herself in danger if someone does not want her help. Her knowledge of firearms, weapons, and overall quick reflexes will also be very helpful when the fighting starts. So while there are many characters that I think would actually be able to survive in most situations, I think Jill just happens to top them all, giving her the #1 spot. So that's it, just my personal opinions on who would actually survive a horror movie if they were stuck in it. Obviously, everybody's going to have their own opinion, and yours may not match mine, so if you'd like to say who you think is probably that #1 survivor, go ahead and let me know down below. Same with if you think that I gave Asa a bad reputation, and he probably would do better than I thought. So that's going to be it for this video. I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.